Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the EverydayFI Podcast again, the show that explores the lives and stories of everyday people like you in the financial independence community. So today the show is going to be a little bit different. I'm not actually interviewing anybody because guess what? It's the 6-month anniversary of the show. Seriously, I've been doing this for 6 months. I can't believe it. I started this on May 1st. I planned it in April. And I just wanted to do a 6-month anniversary show to look back on the show and tell you what's been going on and talk about a couple things. So when I first started, I said I'd talk about money topic every other episode. If anybody has listened to the first episode of this podcast and been like, hey, where's that money topic episode? I'm sorry, that didn't happen. I actually got so many people who wanted to interview on the show that I decided to just publish these episodes. And I don't know if you notice, if you can hear when we're talking, we often say what month it is when we're recording. For example, Lon's episode, we recorded in August and I didn't publish it until October. So that's how many episodes and how many people reached out to be on the show. So I didn't feel like I had room for topic ideas in the beginning. So that's part of the reason. The other part of the reason is I just didn't have time. These topic episodes are a little bit more challenging to create than the interviews. When it comes to podcasting, any of you who haven't done it before, when you interview people, it's so much easier to create the content because the people you're interviewing are the content. Like they are so interesting that you don't have to do much except sit back, listen, and ask questions, and it's fantastic. But coming up with actual rambling monologues about a money topic was a little bit daunting. I think I did one. I think it was episode like 3 or 4 or something. And it was everybody should pursue FI even if you love your job. And I wrote a script for that one. I haven't written a script for this episode. You can probably tell. But it was challenging. I wrote a script that was, I think, 12 or 15 pages long. And when I was done recording, the episode was like 7 minutes. So I had to go back in and flush it out. And writing the script itself took so long. And then reading it and being worried about not reading it correctly or saying a word wrong was too much pressure. So I put that on the back burner, just focused on the interviews mainly because I also wanted to focus on getting the podcast up and running. I was still in a learning capacity at that point. I didn't really know what I was doing. And it was just a little bit easier to take the pressure off myself and just allow the guests who are coming on to create the content for me. And another thing is, I also just thought that people really wouldn't like my random ramblings. I don't know. I know that's dumb because I've heard other podcasts where people, like Brad Barrett, for example, goes on tangents on his show and I enjoy them. And even my friend Mitch on his MYFICapsule podcast, that's mostly him talking about his story and his life. And it's super entertaining. And so I don't know why I thought people wouldn't enjoy that coming from me. And the funny thing is, people that I've heard from who listen to the show and reach out to me say they actually really like hearing my insights. And I've actually had some folks tell me, I want to hear more about your story. Like, we don't get to hear a lot about you. We only hear the snippets when you're responding to people on the show. And so I've been thinking about that and thinking about this money topic stuff and looking at what I want to do with this show and where I want to go with it. I know it's only been 6 months in, but I still want to make sure that this show is relevant and valuable for the community because this is for you. This is not for me. This is for you guys. I know that there was a hole to fill that I heard from a lot of people where we wanted to hear from everyday people. We were a little tired of hearing from the same voices over and over and over again, the people who had blogs or podcasts or books. And we just wanted to hear from everyday folks who don't have any of that stuff. And I will say I'm trying to keep to that because every once in a while I will interview somebody who has a blog or who has a podcast, but I'm trying to keep it as pure as possible because I think it's really important that we elevate the everyday voices in our community because we don't get to hear those a lot. And those people have very valuable stories to tell and interesting stories to tell. And anyway, so this is one of my ramblings that I figure you guys wouldn't want to listen to, but hopefully you're getting value out of it. But anyway, for this episode specifically, I want to talk about four things. First, I want to talk about my top learnings from the last 6 months of interviewing you all in the community. I've learned so much from everybody. And I want to take you guys behind the scenes a little bit to tell you how the show has evolved, what tools I've been using, what challenges I've had. You guys have probably noticed that I've added some advertising in. I'm going to explain that and why. And the next topic I want to talk about is what's next for EverydayFI. So I know I'm giving you some foreshadowing that the money topic episodes are going to be coming back, but what does that look like? And then the last thing at the end of the episode, I have a request from you, the audience. So make sure you listen to the end so you know what that request is. And yeah, let's get started. So the top things that I learned from interviewing so many people, I believe I've done about 24 interviews so far. Number one, everyone who comes on the show thinks their story isn't going to be interesting, but they always are. So every time somebody reaches out to me to be on the show, they'll either email me, they'll go onto my website, everyday-fi.com/podcast. There's a form there that you can fill out to be on the show. And so I get a lot of requests that way. By the way, if you want to be on the show, that's how you do it. And almost every time when somebody writes to me, they're like, I don't know how interesting my story would be, but I'd love to come on the show and share it, and it might be valuable for some people. And it's so funny because I feel the exact same way. I asked to be on a show or two, or people have said, why don't you go on podcast shows? And people are like, oh, tell your story. And I'm like, my story is not that interesting. I mean, at least I don't feel like it's that interesting. But you know what's funny? It's not interesting because you lived it. You lived it every single day. You've heard the story over and over and over again because it's your story. So it gets a little boring. But to other people, your story is very interesting. And if I've learned anything from Ramit Sethi, who I talk about on this podcast all the time, which you guys are probably like, shut up about him. But seriously, he has the right idea. Like, he's interviewing everyday people about their money journeys. And I will say some of his topics tend to be a little repetitive because he's got a very specific mission that he's doing, helping these couples. And a lot of the time, money issues tend to be the same across couples, which is so interesting to me that there's a lot of shared themes and trauma when it comes to money. And what I've noticed is that his podcast, at least for me, is one of my most favorite to listen to because I'm hearing stories from people. And it's just so much easier to relate to an everyday person than it is to somebody who's famous and who has a book or a blog or a podcast. Those people, while awesome to hear from every once in a while, it's hard to relate when you're somebody who has an everyday desk job. Like, I work in tech as a product manager. Yes, now I have a podcast, so I can relate a little bit, but like, I'm not making any money off of this podcast, at least not yet. So it's not quite the same. I'm also not financially independent, not even close. And so it's hard to relate when you hear from these people who are almost like famous in our community. So I just know that hearing stories, even stories that people think aren't going to be interesting, they always are. Seriously, they seriously are. And I think that realization has helped me figure out that I want to open up a little bit more about the money lessons and money stories and money histories in my own life. And that's another little bit of foreshadowing for you, just so you know. Okay, so another learning that I had is that the FI community is more diverse than ever before. So if you listen to episode 24 with Lon, the new wave of FI is what it's called. We talk about how the first wave of FI is mainly geared towards and created by white men, and a lot of them worked in tech. Now, that's not everybody. Of course, you have Vicky Robin, but when you look at like the grandfathers or godfathers of FI, you've got JL Collins and Mr. Money Mustache are the big two, right? And JL Collins worked in the financial space, and I believe Mr. Money Mustache worked in tech. And regardless of where they worked, the people who followed them were often people in tech. And during that time, most of the people who worked in tech were white because just diversity was not happening in the early 2000s in that sector like it is today. And it was also people who were numbers oriented, people who really liked spreadsheets, people who really liked to see how their money was flowing and doing the actual math of it and just getting really technical with the numbers. Those kind of people really flocked to things like Mr. Money Mustache's The Shockingly Simple Math Behind Early Retirement. Interestingly enough, JL Collins' book is called The Simple Path to Wealth, too. So there's a very distinct theme when it comes to these early voices where they want to simplify it and they want to get technical and they want to get mathy with it. And that's not bad. I'm not saying anything like that is bad, but it does mean that a very specific type of person gravitates towards that. So I've said this on the podcast before. I first heard about Mr. Money Mustache when I was 25. I'm 37 now. And when I was 25, I think I read an article written about him. And the article talked about how him and his family lived on $25,000 a year and they saved 50% of their income. Now, I was living in New York City at the time, no kids, no partner, and I was barely making ends meet on $25,000 a year. And that's my average. Like the first couple of years, I was making no money because I was in school and I didn't even have a part-time job. I was living off my student loans. So there was no saving money for me. And so that right there, and the way he spoke about it was like, I don't understand how more people can't do this. It's so easy. It turned me off. I did not resonate with that message at all. And it's no, Mr. Money Mustache is awesome. Like, I'm glad that he's there because he's drawn a lot of people to this community and he created a community himself out there in Colorado. And I think he is amazing. I just didn't connect with that message when I was that age and making that kind of salary. And so basically, this first wave of FI, to get back to my point, just didn't attract a diverse set of people. But the second wave of FI, which Lon and I talked about a little bit in our episode 24, has a lot more different kinds of people now. And I think that's because of shows like ChooseFI, which, yes, I know is run by two white men, but hear me out. In the last year, for example, Brad has made an effort to make his show more diverse by bringing on a co-host who's a woman, bringing on more women guests, bringing on more guests of color. And there's also podcast hosts like Paula Pant, who herself is a woman of color and adds an element of intellect to the money conversations while also leaning on some of the old guard like Joe Saul-Sehy for some expert advice. And then you also have podcasts like SoMoney by Farnoosh Torabi or HerMoney by Jean Chatzky, which are not specifically financial independence related or financial independence retire early related, but they are money related and they are run by more diverse sets of people who talk about a more rounded aspect of money. And because of that, our community, our FI community, has become more diverse. And I've seen that because of the people I've interviewed. So, for example, I've got people in their 20s, like Devin from episode 23 and Will from episode 9. There are people who have families, like Sean and Katie in episode 14, or Carl and Carla in episode 22. You also have got the single folks, like Christina from episodes 12 and 13, and Scott from episode 5. Or people who have gone through divorce, like the anonymous Jay from episode 25. And we have several people of color, like Yao from episode 21 and Abhishek from episode 18. And I will say I am super happy that the split between male and female guests is almost equal. So I have 14 men who have come on and 11 women. And I just want to share something with you guys that was an interesting challenge for this show that you probably might not be aware of. So When I first started and trying to get people to come on the show, the first initial people who were volunteering were men, and I got no women. Now, the men were all different backgrounds, different ages, different ethnicities. Some were American, some weren't, but it was all men. And I found that very interesting. And I don't have any real facts about why this is. I just have theories or hypotheses. Because money is tied so much to our self-worth, and women often are the ones who are either bringing in less to the household because we get paid less, or bringing in nothing because they are mothers and taking care of kids, or they're caregivers of elderly parents or otherwise. I think for women, talking about money is a little bit harder, because if you feel like you're not contributing as much as, say, men feel like they're contributing, because society tells men they have to be the providers, right? Which is, I think, ridiculous, by the way. But because of that, men tend to have more money and make more money, and so they are more comfortable talking about it. But women, not so much. And so they're like, well, I don't want to talk about this area where I'm not contributing enough. Again, this is just a hypothesis I have. I don't have any data on this at all, but it's what I thought. So the way that I tried to open this up for people is, first of all, I asked women specifically, will you come on to my show? I want to hear your story. So I didn't just passively wait for women to sign up. Second, I shared with women this fact that I was having trouble finding women, and discussing the why with other women in our community, which was really interesting. And, they confirmed what I just said, that for women, talking about money is a lot harder than for men. And so I adopted the idea of, okay, first of all, I'm only using first names and last initials. And if people want to share their last names in the actual recording, that's totally fine. But I will only ever share first names and last initials. And I also introduced the idea of being anonymous. And the funny thing is, the first person who was anonymous on the show was a man. But I did that so that women would feel more comfortable to come on and share their story, because I think that is incredibly valuable. And people need to see themselves in others. So if a show is only interviewing white men, then only white men are going to listen to it. But if a show is interviewing white, Black, Southeast Asian, South Asian, Northern European, Southern European, South American, South African, African, whatever, all the ethnicities, all the genders, male, female, cisgender, transgender, LGBTQ, all of it. I want to have all of it on my show, because I want everybody in the community to see themselves in somebody on this show. So anyway, that's one thing that I learned, that our community is way more diverse than we think it is. And I'm super proud of that fact. And I want to keep showing that in my episodes by having diverse people come on. I'm so happy that we have so many more people who are comfortable coming on and sharing their stories so that others can hear about it. Okay, so the third thing that I learned is that people love the show not because of me, but because of you, the community. I already said this, but people really want to hear your story. Like, they might see themselves in you. I have seen myself in almost every single person who has come on here. Seriously, I don't know if you guys hear this when I'm interviewing, but I'm like, oh my God, I feel the exact same way. I did the exact same thing. There's always something, whether big or small, that I identify with. And the fact that I get to help you, the community, share that with the rest of the community is just so freaking awesome. And I'm just the conduit. I'm not the show. Megan doesn't matter. You are the ones who matter. And so I think more of you coming on is going to make this show even richer, even more valuable to others in this community. So yeah, that's a request for people to keep applying to be on the show. Again, everyday-fi.com/podcast. There is a form on that page that you can easily just go in and say, I want to be on the show. And I usually try to respond within a few days, and then I'll send you an invite email with all the information, and you can schedule a time to be on the show. I don't say that anybody can't be on the show. Like, the only people who I've said no to are like those podcast recruiters who are like, hey, I have this person who works in the financial, services industry and has a book and wants to be on your show. They have no idea what the FI community is. They're just trying to promote their book or whatever. And I'm like, no, you picked the wrong show. Sorry, this is not what that's about. I literally only try to only interview everyday people who subscribe to the financial independence mindset or community. And I'm not saying that I won't branch out, but because I want to target the FI community specifically, that's who I want to keep interviewing for now. I will only stop interviewing if the pool of people who want to be on the show drives up. Even if that happens, I might just ask people who've been on before to come back on. All right, let's switch to behind the scenes. So when I first started this podcast, I just raw dog edited these episodes by manipulating the WAV files. Okay, if you guys were like, what the heck does that mean? So basically, when you record an audio file, it has this little wave that it does that shows your voice. And when you edit, and you can use anything, like I'm using GarageBand on my Mac because it's free. You go in and you have to literally cut pieces of that WAV file and remove them and then join them back together. It is a tedious as heck process. And it took forever, but it was all that I knew in the beginning. But the first episode that I did, Craig and Julia's, which was episode 2, they had a 35-minute episode, and it took me 4 hours to edit that episode. Now, I was a little bit of a perfectionist in the beginning. I've since divested of that perfectionism a little bit and let some of the rambling and some of the likes and some of the ums slip in here and there. But for that episode, I was getting every single, and I was like, I will not be able to sustain this. If I have to take 4 hours for every episode, and this was only 35 minutes, what happens when it's an hour? Oh my God. So that freaked me out. And I was actually starting to get really burnt out until I basically reached out to Brad Barrett and Alan Donegan for help because I've mentioned this on the show, but Brad was the one who helped name the show EverydayFI because the name that I had for it just didn't make sense. I used to have a money brand called A Latte Money, and I liked it because it was a play on words of a lot of money, but it was a latte money, get it? And I just realized that didn't really make sense anymore with the route that I wanted to go down because I wanted to specifically make this about everyday people in the FI community. And so Brad was like, EverydayFI. And I was like, oh my God, you're a genius. And luckily that name was not taken anywhere else. So I snatched it up. However, everydayfi.com without the dash, that is taken. And if you are the person who has that domain and are listening, I would totally buy that from you. So if you have that domain, or if you can track down who has that domain, hit me up. My email is on my website, everyday-fi.com/about. If you scroll down, there's a contact me with my email. So yeah, hit me up if you know who has that domain. Anyway, I basically reached out to them and said, how do you guys sustain this? How do you edit your shows? Can I use your editor? Because this is starting to become too much for me. And I didn't want to quit the show. I was very worried that I was going to get so burnt out that I was going to quit the show if I didn't find somebody to edit it for me. And so Brad mentioned that he does hire somebody, but they're a little bit expensive. And then Alan was like, I've used people on Fiverr. And so I got on Fiverr and I had 3 different people who edited podcast episodes for me. One was pretty great. She did a couple. Her name was Tori, and she did a great job. But she was like, I actually have too much work, so I have to cut you. And I was like, well, great, cool. Okay, thanks. And then I got a second person, and actually, I think I only got one other person now that I think about it. And the quality of their editing was not great. I think I used them for 2 episodes, and I just didn't like it when the episode came back, it just sounded grainy. If you guys have listened to every episode and you heard a couple grainy episodes, those are probably the ones. And nothing that I did on my end to try and correct it helped. And I even gave them feedback hey, this sounds really grainy, what's going on? And they blamed it on me. So I was like, okay. And this was I was spending probably between $100 and $150 an episode to edit. And I was like, this is not going to work. I'm putting out like 4 to 5 episodes, sometimes 6 episodes a month. And so there's no way that I could sustain that when I'm not making any money off of this show. And I was actually, again, worried that I was going to have to give up the show because I didn't know what else to do. When I interviewed Jay in episode 25, which was just a few episodes ago, he told me about Descript or Descript. So the people who have told me about it on the streets call it Descript, whereas I call it Descript because that's what their website calls it, like description. But Descript is a godsend. It is so much easier to edit the podcast now because what they do is they take the audio file and they transcribe it. So it's like editing a document. I don't have to do any WAV file crap, which is nice. I mean, I can if I want to. Like, they have the ability to do that if they don't quite edit the right way. Like, if they don't quite get the end of a word clipped off, I can go in and edit it. It's a little bit challenging because they do some weird stuff. But anyway, otherwise, they're amazing. It's cut my editing time by 2/3. So something that used to take me 3 hours now takes me 1. And it's really great because my episodes have been getting longer and longer. And so like an hour and a half episode takes me maybe an hour and a half to edit, maybe like 2 hours to edit. So I'm listening through the whole episode and then the edits take like 30 minutes. And it's such a godsend and it's so easy to use. And then it also has AI that cuts out filler words, which I used on this episode, by the way. So you should hear me when it's unedited. Like, I say and like every other freaking word. It's so annoying. And I have to edit it out all the time. They also can make the sound quality smoother. Now, I don't always use them to do that, but sometimes I do. So I did use them to smooth out the sound on Devin's episode in episode 22. Because he was using AirPods and he was in an echoey room at school because he was working front desk somewhere and doing the interview at the same time. And the sound wasn't the best, but Descript made it sound like he was in a recording studio, which was pretty awesome. So I really like that I switched to Descript. I'm not advertising for them right now. I'm just telling you, if you're a podcaster who's looking for a better way to do it, switch to Descript. I don't have any sort of like promotional thing to give you, but they're pretty cool. I am doing the $19 a month version right now. I'll probably switch to doing that yearly because I think I save like $2 a month or something like that. I forget. And I know that I'm going to use it. So I did it for the monthly to really see if I really wanted to use it. And now I'm like, yeah, for sure, going to do that. So I need to remember to switch. But anyway, okay. So another thing about the podcast, I used to record with this app called Riverside, and I used the free version, but the audio was absolutely terrible. It used so much bandwidth because what it would do is, as it was recording, it would upload to the cloud real time. And the problem with that is it slows down your internet. And if you already have a lower bandwidth internet, it's going to make it even worse. So I was having issues with myself and my guests, either their internet dropping or cutting out to where I had to literally edit the chops in their voice. So in episode 3 with Justin, Fi needs the RE. So that happened on that episode with him. I don't know if it was my internet or his, but almost every 5 minutes there would be a drop in internet and the word would like cut off in the middle. And so it'd be like it was just weird sounding. And it was hard to know that was happening. And so I would have to go into the WAV file and literally join the word back together. And it took forever. And that was only my 3rd episode. So I've got Craig and Julia, my first recording that's not the intro, taking 4 hours because I was trying to figure that out. And then I've got the sound issues with Justin in episode 3. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And so I was like, screw this. I'm not using Riverside anymore. And I didn't want to upgrade because it was a little expensive. And I already had Google for my domain and email. And so I just decided to upgrade to a business account. I think it added like $7 a month to my bill. And I just use Google Meet. now. And I'm probably going to use that for the foreseeable future. There might be a time when I want something that records each voice independently. Google doesn't do that. But right now, I don't really have a need for it because Descript separates out the voices anyway. And so I don't really have to worry about that. And I just tell people before I interview them that, hey, I'm going to go on mute so I don't talk over you. If you want to do the same, you don't have to. It makes it a lot easier when I'm editing. So another behind the scenes, if you've been listening for a while, I didn't used to have advertisements and now I do. I use Libsyn for my hosting platform and they allow you to have advertising and they have different like advertising tiers. And I don't really know all the glitz and glam with it, but when I first signed up, I asked them like, what's the threshold for this? And it's a certain amount of downloads per month or episode or something like that. And apparently I hit that, which was awesome. Thank you guys. Yay. And they were like, so you can use advertisements now. And I was like, sweet. But they're the kind of advertisements that like you add a slot into your show and any advertiser can put their advertisement in. So I can't choose who's advertising on my show, unfortunately. I'm hoping that once I get more of a following, I'll be able to do more personalized ads because then I can actually pick and choose who advertises with me, and that would provide more valuable products for you. But right now, I'm using this kind of advertisement because it really does help offset the costs because even though I've cut them way down, it's still around $100 a month for me to keep this up. And so if I could at least cover the cost of the podcast, that would make it easier for me to keep it going. And I know $100 a month, you guys are probably like, that's not very much money. But it's also it's a time commitment thing too. I'm basically paying to do it versus getting paid to do it. And so I have to kind of balance that, especially now that my partner Chris and I, who you guys have probably heard me talk about him a lot, we are going to be trying to have a child soon. And actually I found out recently that I have some issues with my fertility. And so there's going to be a lot more to handle in my life and think about and deal with. And so I want to make sure, again, that I don't burn out and stop the show. Like I want to keep the show going. And so having a way of showing that the show is generating some sort of income for me helps me with that and helps me keep it going. All of this to say, I truly appreciate you all listening to these ads and supporting the show in this way. I'm trying to only put 1 in the beginning, 3 in the middle, and 2 at the end. So only 6, I think, 30-second ads. So 3 minutes total per episode. 3 minutes is not a lot, right? So, and I'm sorry if they're ads for things that you're like, I would never buy this in my life, but it really does help me keep the show going. And also the outro has other ways you can support the show if you're so inclined. There's Patreon, which all of this will be at the end of the show, so you don't have to like listen to this right now or write it down. But there's a Patreon, there's a Buy Me a Coffee site, which is pretty cool. Christina from episodes 12 and 13, she was the one who introduced me to that. And yeah, it's just a way to at least help me keep the show going. It would be helpful to show on the balance sheet that like, hey, this is not only bringing me joy in my life, but it is also bringing in some sort of income. To be honest with you guys, what I would love to happen someday is be able to retire early and just have income from the podcast and that's it. Like that would be amazing. That's my goal because I would rather do this podcast full time and really get it to a chef's kiss level of awesome than my regular job. If my boss is listening, this is all a lie. I'm just kidding. I really love my job. I'm going to be there forever. No, actually, he knows about this podcast and loves that I do this. And he has asked me, like, so when are you getting advertising? When are you going to quit your job? When are you going to be able to make enough money to quit your job off your podcast? So he's actually really supportive about it. It's awesome. But anyway, that is my ultimate goal would be like the podcast is my financial independence job. So if you like the show at all, any support helps. Listening to the 3 minutes of advertisements is going to help me so much. And yeah, also, if there's anybody out there who would like to volunteer their time for the podcast, like I said, I can't really sustain paying anybody because it's, like I said, it's so expensive to pay people and it should be like they deserve that money. I just can't do that if I'm not bringing in an income for the show. But if I have a couple projects that are sitting on the side because I just don't have time to do them. So if anybody in the community is willing to like volunteer to do things, for example, I have a resource spreadsheet that I would love to keep updated with the show note links that I've been putting into every show. I'd like to update that spreadsheet with all of those links, and I just haven't had time to do it. And a lot of the links are repeats, but if I could just have one repository of all of those resources that you can go to on my website and find, that would be amazing. But I just have not had time to update it. I think I did 2 shows worth and was like, this is really a lot of time. So if anybody wants to volunteer to do that, who just, has time, wants to volunteer, wants to help out on the show, hit me up. You can email me again, everyday-fi.com/about. Scroll down, there's a contact me section that has my email. All right, next up, I want to talk about what's next for the show. So I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm still not completely sure about which direction I want to go with the show. I definitely know that I want to introduce money topic or topic episodes. I'm probably going to call them something different, but that's just what I've got right now. I'm definitely not going to take away the interviews. The only way that the interviews with the everyday people in our community go away is if nobody wants to be on the show anymore, or I've interviewed everybody repeatedly or something like that. That's the only way that's going to stop happening. But for the money topic episodes, I'm still at a loss because I am not a money professional. So I don't have my CFP. I guess you could sort of call me a money coach, but I don't have any sort of certifications. Like anybody can call themselves a coach. They don't have to have certifications, but I don't really like that because I haven't actually ever coached anybody on their money. I've answered questions here and there, but I've never actually been a coach. I've never been paid for it. I know a lot of stuff, but I don't want to give advice necessarily. But that doesn't mean that you guys might not have topics or ideas or questions that I couldn't help facilitate answers to. So what I'm probably going to do is just throw some spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks. My first thought is to talk about money lessons in my own life in a deeper, more detailed way. So a lot of times I bring these up in the episodes where I'm talking with actual people, and I'll bring up times in my life where something similar has happened. I would love to go deeper into those kinds of topics. And I forget who says this. When you're writing a book, they say, write what you know. Well, this is what I know. I know my own money history. I know my own money stories, and I know what I've learned, and I know what I did to either correct them or whatever. And so I'd love to talk about some of those things. And it could be anything from when I didn't know how to balance a checkbook when I was 16 and ran up my checking account with a whole bunch of fees and what happened with that. How I bought my first car, how I paid for college and all the mistakes I made there, and what I did with my student loans, how I bought my first property and then my second property, how I pay for repairs that come out of freaking nowhere, how I'm thinking about paying for potentially fertility treatments that I might have to have or adoption, depending on how this goes with the fertility issues, which is ongoing right now. We don't know a lot, so I don't have a lot to say there, but just things like that. A good one is how I switched from an art history career to a tech career, and I basically tripled my income in a 5 to 6 year period. I could talk about that. So that's where I'm probably going to start. Those topics will probably dry up unless I have like money encounters on a regular basis. I really hope I don't, unless they're good money encounters. I don't want to have bad money encounters on a regular basis that I get to share with you, because that would be really exhausting and anxiety inducing. So another thought I had is about bringing maybe some experts on, because there are some people that I met doing the show. For example, Mark from Mark's Money Mind, he is a CFP, and he has said that he would love to come on the show and potentially answer some questions. I also have a mother who recently retired from being CFO for Berkshire Hathaway, and she said she'd love to come on. And so she's an expert. She is also a public accountant, and so she can answer tax questions and things like that. But she has said that she'd love to come on and talk about money topics. Right now, she just retired, and she retired at a normal retirement age. She retired at 66. So She's going through things like Medicare and Social Security, and she has told me she'd love to talk about that on the show because it's so confusing, apparently, and she'd love to share what she's learned. So those are some of the ideas I have. But this leads me to the last thing that I want to talk about in the show is a request that I have for you, the audience. So as you can see, I have a couple ideas about where I want to take the show, some topics that I want to talk about, but obviously those are going to run dry. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear about what topics you want to hear on the show. What do you think is missing in the FI community space right now? What topics, ideas, explorations don't get enough airtime in your opinion? I added a form to my website, everyday-fi.com/podcast. If you scroll down a little bit, it's the first form that says share your ideas. If you submit your thoughts there, I would love to know what you want to hear on this show, where you would like to see the show go. Because, like I said earlier, this podcast is about you, the community. So who better to run the show than you guys? So yeah, go to everyday-fi.com/podcast, scroll down just a smidge, and the form to share your ideas about what topic should be on the show will be right there. There's also right under that the form to submit to be interviewed on the show. So if you also want to come on the show, tell your story, how you found the financial independence community, what your money past looks like, how your parents talked about money, and also share your struggles and wins with the community, come on. You can be anonymous, of course, if you're not comfortable sharing your story. I try to avoid talking about explicit numbers, so you don't have to worry about that. If you want to share that, you can, but I don't ask that question because that, to me, is not important. That's going to be different for everybody. There are some people who need $12 million to retire, and there's some people who can live on $7,000 a year. So there is a range for everybody. And so that's why I don't talk about numbers. So you don't have to worry about that. But anyway, that's it for the show this time. I hope you enjoyed the ramblings. I hope you can submit your ideas for more ramblings that you would like to hear from me. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI Podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, everyday-fi.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.